There are certain voices that never quite leave us. They echo in our memories, stitched into scenes of film, melodies from musicals, or the cadence of a well-timed line delivered with quiet confidence. For many, Jerry Orbach was one such voice, a familiar presence who could command a Broadway stage, light up a silver screen, or bring gravity and charm to a television crime drama. His face, weathered yet kind, became synonymous with integrity, wit, and an unmistakable sense of humanity. Though modern audiences may remember him best as Detective Lenny Briscoe, the quick-tongued, world-weary officer on Law and Order, Orbach's story stretches far beyond that role. Before he was a staple of primetime television, he was a matinee idol on the stage, a contract player in the golden days of Broadway, originating roles in productions that would become staples of American theater. His voice, resonant and full of feeling, gave life to characters both noble and flawed. Whether crooning through the footlights or standing behind a badge, Orbach brought a depth to his performances that made them feel lived in and true. But behind the camera, there was a quieter man, one who loved deeply, worked tirelessly, and battled illness with discretion and dignity. He lived not for the spotlight, but for the craft. For decades, he worked steadily, never seeking celebrity, but earning it all the same. His career, unlike so many, was not built on spectacle, but on staying power. He endured, and in doing so, he became one of the rare performers whose presence never felt imposed, but welcomed. In this story, we'll walk the path of Jerry Orbach's remarkable life. From his early days in a family of vaudeville and song, through the golden age of Broadway, to the living rooms of millions as a television fixture. We'll step inside the home he cherished in New York City, filled with art, laughter, and memory. And we'll peer into the silence of a house left behind in Florida, abandoned, but still whispering echoes of a life once lived. It is a tale of triumph and talent, of loss and legacy. And as we retrace the steps of Jerry Orbach's journey, we do so with reverence for a performer whose gifts reached far beyond the stage, and whose final curtain call was met not with fanfare, but with heartfelt gratitude from those who knew, perhaps quietly, just how much he gave. But before the fame, before the marquee lights and network scripts, there was a young man chasing something timeless. And that is where our story begins. Long before he became a fixture of American entertainment, Jerry Orbach was simply a boy in motion. Born on October 20th, 1935, in the Bronx, New York, his early life was anything but static. His family moved often, chasing opportunity, chasing rhythm, chasing dreams. His father, Leon Orbach, was a former vaudeville performer turned restaurateur, a man who knew the magic of the stage, even if he no longer lived in its glow. His mother, Emily Olecki, brought melody into the home, having once sung on radio programs. It was a household where performance wasn't just admired, it was a part of the furniture. The Orbachs didn't stay rooted for long. Jerry's childhood took him through a mosaic of American towns, Scranton, Springfield, Mount Vernon, and eventually Waukegan, Illinois. With each move came new scenery, new rhythms, and new classrooms. But despite the frequent changes, there was always a thread of consistency. Storytelling, performance, and music. In those quiet towns, Jerry absorbed the cadence of American life, learning how to read people, mimic accents, and find his way in unfamiliar places. These were the tools of an actor being forged long before he'd ever set foot on a stage. He was raised in the Roman Catholic faith, his mother's tradition, despite his father's Jewish background, a blending of heritages that would shape Jerry's gentle tolerance and sense of cultural nuance. As a teenager in Waukegan, Jerry began to explore his interests more fully. He played football and worked summer jobs, including a stint at the Chevy Chase Country Club in Wheeling. But even amid the games and chores, there was something else pulling at him. A desire to perform, to inhabit other lives, to understand the human condition from the inside out. College came next, though not for long. Jerry enrolled at the University of Illinois and later transferred to Northwestern, but the classroom walls felt confining. He yearned for something more electric, more alive. With quiet determination, he packed up and headed for New York City. The decision was bold, but never reckless. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing craft. He enrolled at the prestigious Actors Studio, a training ground for serious performers where method acting was taught not as a technique, but as a way of life. There, Jerry learned to dig deeper, to build a character from the inside. He listened, observed, practiced. And soon, what began as a childhood filled with music and movement began to take form as a calling. His earliest screen credits were small, blink and you'll miss it appearances in films like Guys and Dolls and Marty. But his stage debut in the Threepenny Opera revealed a voice and presence that couldn't be ignored. The boy who had grown up watching the world from the backseat of family cars was now stepping into the spotlight. Yet even as his career began to rise, it would be the stage, not the screen, that offered him his first true home. Jerry Orbach arrived in New York not with a grand flourish, but with quiet intent. He was not yet a name, not yet a face audiences would recognize in dimly lit theaters or on the glow of television screens. But he had something more important, a steady resolve and an unshakable belief in the transformative power of performance. At the Actors Studio, surrounded by some of the most dedicated artists of his generation, Orbach honed his craft not as a performer seeking applause, but as a student searching for truth. His break came not with fanfare, but with grit. Cast in the Threepenny Opera in 1955, he stepped into a world that suited him perfectly. Raw, musically charged, and emotionally complex. It was a fitting debut for a man whose talents spanned both music and drama. He possessed not just a strong voice, but a striking presence, something grounded, accessible, and deeply human. Audiences responded to him not because he demanded attention, but because he earned it. As the 1960s unfolded, Orbach's career found firm footing on Broadway. He wasn't the kind of actor who arrived on a single overnight success. Instead, his rise was gradual, built on consistency and character work. He became known for originating roles that would go on to define the American musical landscape. In Carnival, he played Paul Berthollet, a love-weary puppeteer whose cynicism melts in the face of innocence. It was a role that required delicacy, and Orbach brought just that. Then came Promises in 1968, where he portrayed Chuck Baxter, a lonely office worker caught in a web of corporate schemes and unspoken love. The role won him a Tony Award for Best Actor in a Musical, an accolade that cemented his place among Broadway's elite. His performance was as much about what he didn't say as what he did. With a glance, a shrug, a quiet line delivered just so, he made audiences feel the ache of an ordinary man reaching for something more. And yet, he never let the success harden him. Colleagues admired his humility, his professionalism, and the warmth he extended to everyone in the wings. In an industry where egos often ran high, Orbach remained grounded. He knew his lines, hit his marks, and carried himself with the quiet grace of a man doing what he was born to do. In 1975, he took on another defining role, Billy Flynn, the slick, silver-tongued lawyer in Chicago. With his rich baritone voice and sly charisma, he captured the heart of a show that blurred the line between justice and showmanship. It was a performance that gleamed with polish but never lost its soul. Once again, Orbach proved that even in a role full of flash, his greatest strength was restraint. By the late 1970s, he had become a fixture on the Broadway marquee. Not as a celebrity, but as an actor's actor, respected, reliable, and beloved. He had built a legacy on the stage, one that reflected not only his talent, but his devotion to the work. Still, as bright as the footlights were, a different medium was beginning to call. One that would bring his voice, his humor, and his quiet depth into living rooms across the country. While Jerry Orbach's foundation was built on the boards of Broadway, the silver screen soon beckoned. And though his transition from stage to film was never accompanied by the blinding spotlight of a leading man persona, it revealed something richer, a quiet chameleon with remarkable range. In cinema, Orbach found a space where his grounded presence, sharp wit, and expressive voice could take on new textures, and he embraced it with the same subtle brilliance he had always brought to the stage. His early roles were modest, supporting parts in films like Mad Dog Call and John Goldfarb, Please Come Home, but each offered Orbach a new canvas. He moved easily between comedy, crime, and drama, never settling into a single mold. The defining moment of his film career came in 1971 with The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, where he played Salvatore Palumbo, a bumbling gangster with both menace and melancholy. The performance was offbeat and charismatic, marking Orbach's arrival as a distinct voice in cinematic storytelling. Throughout the 1970s, he built a steady and eclectic filmography. In A Fan's Notes, Foreplay, and The Sentinel, he proved his ability to anchor both character-driven comedy and eerie thrillers. Then came Prince of the City in 1981, a gritty neo-noir directed by Sidney Lumet. As narcotics detective Gus Levy, Orbach disappeared into the role, delivering a performance steeped in intensity and nuance. It was a departure from musical theater, a leap into the shadows of realism. Critics took note, calling it one of the strongest turns of his film career. Orbach's screen presence continued to grow in the 1980s. In Brewster's Millions, he stood firm amidst chaos, while in FX, he brought gravitas to the suspense. But it was in 1987 that he reached a broader, unexpected audience with Dirty Dancing. As Jake Houseman, the stern yet loving father of Baby, Orbach struck a chord. He wasn't just playing a parent. He was embodying a generational ideal. His moments in the film, full of conflicted pride and quiet concern, added an emotional weight that gave the romance and rebellion at the heart of the story a grounding force. Then, in a delightful shift, Orbach lent his talents to animation. In 1991, he voiced Lumiere, the charming, candlelit maitre d' in Disney's Beauty and the Beast. His rendition of Be Our Guest became iconic, a performance filled with sparkle, warmth, and that ever-present twinkle in his voice. For many, this was their first encounter with Orbach, not as a hardened detective or a Broadway crooner, but as a dancing candlestick full of French flair and theatrical delight. It was proof, once again, of his boundless versatility. Throughout the 1990s and into the early 2000s, he continued to appear in films both big and small. From comedies like Straight Talk and Delirious, to action hits like Universal Soldier, to the quieter dramas of Chinese Coffee and Manna from Heaven, Orbach treated every role with equal care. His final film, Protesters, released in 2004, cast him once more as a police officer, a role he had come to inhabit with deep familiarity and respect. Yet even as his film work flourished, a different screen would come to define his legacy. A smaller one, glowing in homes across the country, where a detective named Briscoe was about to become a household name. By the time Jerry Orbach stepped into the well-worn shoes of Detective Lenny Briscoe, he was already a seasoned actor with a voice that carried the echoes of 1,000 stages. But on television, he would find a second act that felt less like a reinvention and more like a natural evolution. With his sharp wit, gravelly cadence, and unmistakable presence, Orbach transformed a supporting police procedural role into one of the most enduring characters in network history. His relationship with television began much earlier, of course. In the 1960s and 70s, he had appeared on a wide range of series: Love, American Style, Medical Center, Kojak, and even Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. He was a familiar face, never flashy, always reliable. He made guest roles memorable, breathing life into characters who might have otherwise been forgotten by the time the credits rolled. In 1985, Orbach made a notable turn on Murder. She wrote as the rumpled private I. Harry McGraw. Audiences adored the character's scrappy charm, so much so that he was given his own spin-off, The Law and Harry McGraw, which aired briefly from 1987 to 1988. Though the series didn't last long, it hinted at something powerful: Orbach's gift for embodying characters who felt lived in, complex, and entirely real. Then, in 1992, a role came along that would redefine everything. When Jerry Orbach joined Law and Order as Detective Lenny Briscoe, the show had already been running for 2 seasons. But his arrival brought a shift in tone, a dry humor, a deeper humanity. Briscoe wasn't just another hard-nosed detective. He was a man with history behind his eyes. With each quip, each weary glance, Orbach suggested layers. The cases that stayed with him, the mistakes that haunted him, the quiet moral compass guiding every choice. Week after week, he brought a quiet gravitas to the procedural format. He made the script sing, finding music in the rhythm of interrogation rooms and dimly lit precincts. Audiences connected with him not because he was heroic, but because he was human. Flawed, decent, daubed. Over the course of 12 years and nearly 300 episodes, Orbach became the face of Law and Order. His chemistry with co-stars, his impeccable timing, and his deep understanding of character turned Briscoe into more than a cop. He became a symbol of the show's very soul. He earned an Emmy nomination in 2000 and was awarded a posthumous Screen Actors Guild Award in 2004. But for Orbach, it was never about the accolades. It was about the work. He brought Briscoe to various spin-offs and crossovers, from Special Victims Unit to Criminal Intent, even to Homicide, Life on the Street. Each appearance reinforced his place in the television canon, not as a fleeting guest star, but as a fixture, a familiar figure who made millions feel, even in the most fictional of crimes, that justice still mattered. And yet, as the cameras rolled and the cases piled up behind the scenes, a quieter struggle had already begun, one Orbach chose to keep from public view, even as he carried on with the role that defined his legacy. Behind the badge and beyond the spotlight, Jerry Orbach lived a life rooted in deep affection, for his family, for his city, and for the quiet comforts that gave him balance amid the intensity of a long career. Though audiences knew him as the voice of reason on screen, those who knew him best described a man of warmth, wit, and unwavering loyalty. In 1958, long before he became a household name, Orbach married Marta Kuro. The two shared nearly 2 decades together and had 2 sons, Tony and Christopher. Though the marriage ended in divorce in 1975, the bond between Jerry and his children endured, woven together through shared traditions, humor, and a deep love for the arts. Tony, the elder, followed a more grounded path, becoming a construction manager by trade, but also earning acclaim as a crossword puzzle constructor, with dozens of puzzles published in the New York Times. Christopher, meanwhile, inherited the performance gene, stepping into acting and music. He would go on to portray Ken Briscoe, the nephew of his father's character, in the first season of Law and Order. Special Victims Unit, a quiet nod to legacy, both fictional and real. In 1979, Jerry found love again, this time with Elaine Cancilla, a fellow Broadway veteran and dancer. The two had met during the production of Chicago, a show that had already become a defining moment in Orbach's career. Their marriage brought with it a sense of creative partnership and domestic harmony. They shared more than a home. They shared a language, a rhythm, a passion for their craft. Elaine was not just a spouse, but a trusted confidant, an artist in her own right who understood the life Jerry had built and the pressures that came with it. Their home in New York City, specifically a cozy, character-filled brownstone in Chelsea, became a sanctuary. It was a gathering place for friends, a playground for their children, and a testament to their shared aesthetic: warm, artistic, and welcoming. Orbach was a familiar sight in the neighborhood, often spotted at local restaurants, dry cleaners, or just strolling down the block. He wasn't a distant celebrity. He was the neighbor with the twinkle in his eye, the regular who chatted up waiters, who left signed photographs on shop walls not out of ego, but gratitude. Despite his fame, he lived without pretense. He never abandoned his roots, never forgot where he came from. He stayed in New York long after many stars fled for California, choosing instead the city's rhythm, its grit, and its creative heartbeat. And New York, in turn, embraced him. After his passing, the intersection of 8th Avenue and 53rd Street was renamed in his honor, Jerry Orbach Way, a rare tribute made possible not by political pull, but by overwhelming community support. Here was a man who brought dignity to every role, who raised sons with thoughtfulness, and who built a life not on image, but on intimacy. He was at once the star and the everyman, an icon and a neighbor, a working actor who never stopped working, but who always, somehow, made time for home. Yet even as he remained a familiar presence in his city, Orbach was quietly facing the most difficult role of his life, one that would test his endurance, his grace, and his privacy in ways the public never fully saw. In the world of entertainment, where personal struggles are often laid bare for all to see, Jerry Orbach stood apart. When illness found him, he did not make a spectacle of it. He simply carried on. The public saw the same witty, composed Detective Briscoe week after week, never knowing the quiet battle unfolding behind the scenes. It was in January of 1994, just 2 years into his tenure on Law and Order, that Orbach received a diagnosis of prostate cancer. It was a daunting revelation, but he faced it with the quiet resolve that had come to define him. He underwent radiation therapy with hopes of eradicating the disease, and for a time, the treatment seemed successful. He kept the news private, telling only close friends and family. Work continued uninterrupted. Lines were learned, scenes filmed, cases solved on screen, while off-screen, his body began a different kind of fight. By the end of that same year, the cancer returned. This time it had spread. Orbach began hormone therapy, a less aggressive but long-term approach designed to contain the illness. For the next decade, he would quietly manage his health while continuing to appear on Law and Order. There were no dramatic announcements, no public statements. He asked only to keep working, to keep contributing. To his castmates, he remained a professional, tireless, dependable, sharp. Even as treatments took their toll, Orbach never missed a beat. His performances remained steady, his humor intact. It was only in 2004, near the end of his life, that the severity of his illness became known. And even then, his final wish was not to retreat, but to return. He had agreed to reprise his role as Briscoe in Law and Order, Trial by Jury, a spin-off that offered a lighter shooting schedule. It was a compromise, an acknowledgement that time was running short, but the desire to perform remained strong. He managed to film just 2 episodes. They aired posthumously, with viewers unaware they were witnessing a farewell. On December 28, 2004, Jerry Orbach passed away at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. He was 69 years old. The news struck quietly and deeply. Many had no idea he had been ill. He had shielded his struggle with the same integrity he brought to every role. Tributes poured in. Broadway dimmed its lights the following evening, a gesture reserved only for the most cherished figures in the theater world. NBC re-aired his final Law and Order episode. Spin-offs like Criminal Intent and Trial by Jury included memorials and photographs, subtle but sincere acknowledgments of the man whose voice had become part of the very fabric of the franchise. Beyond the accolades, his legacy found life in small, generous acts. Orbach had long expressed his desire to donate his eyes after his passing. That wish was fulfilled. Two individuals, one nearsighted, the other farsighted, received the gift of sight through his corneas. In time, his image was even featured in an ad campaign for a New York bank, a final performance that carried no lines, only light. As the curtain closed on a remarkable life, it was not applause that marked the end, but a collective breath, a pause from audiences and colleagues alike, grateful for the years he gave and the grace with which he gave them. If the stage was where Jerry Orbach performed, then his home was where he lived most fully. Tucked away in New York City's Chelsea neighborhood, just 20 blocks south of Times Square, stood a three-story brownstone that echoed with laughter, music, and the quiet rituals of family life. It was not a mansion in the traditional Hollywood sense, but rather a home in the truest form, intimate, warm, and alive with personal history. Orbach lived there with his first wife, Marta Couro, and their sons Tony and Christopher. In the early 1970s, the block still felt like a village. Summers were filled with the sounds of lawnmowers and neighbors greeting each other on stoops. The Orbach home from the outside was framed by potted palms and gardenias, an inviting blend of urban charm and subtle elegance. But inside, it told a far more vivid story, a story written in furnishings, colors, and decades of memory. The interior reflected both Jerry's creative spirit and Marta's love of design. White rattan chairs and shelves lined the rooms, offering a breezy, almost coastal feel that contrasted with the gray of Manhattan winters. A wine cellar in the basement, stocked and waiting for small gatherings, added an element of casual luxury. In the kitchen, a 19th century brass panel hung above the stove, a centerpiece not just of decor, but of sentiment. It was here that the Orbach boys first learned to cook, guided by their parents in a space that felt more like a memory than a room. The house was full of thoughtful details. A first-floor playroom in red, white, and blue, where a rope swing, miniature pinball machine, and theater mirror conjured childhood soaked in imagination. Jerry's love for billiards found a home in the living room, where he altered the pool table's pockets to make games more challenging, a fitting metaphor for a man who never took the easy shot. Each bedroom bore the marks of personal flair. Christopher's room featured whimsical wallpaper with silver woodland animals, while an old Union Dues office, once part of the building's past life, was transformed into a den of plum walls, kilim rugs, and artistic relics. A 1920s typewriter sat beneath posters of Sarah Bernhardt and Marta's California landscape photography, reminders of the family's creative lineage. Neighbors included legendary names like Geraldine Page, Rip Torn, and Anthony Perkins. The nearby Chelsea Hotel pulsed with artistic energy, and the neighborhood felt less like a celebrity enclave and more like a creative sanctuary. Jerry was part of that fabric. He wasn't a distant star, but a regular at local restaurants, a friendly face at the corner market, a loyal patron of his dry cleaner, whose walls featured a framed photograph of him, smiling. The brownstone was more than real estate. It was a testament to the life Jerry had built, rooted in love, flavored with art, and wrapped in the rhythms of a city he never abandoned. It stood as a quiet witness to dinners, arguments, rehearsals, birthdays, and every ordinary moment in between. But far from the bustling sidewalks of Chelsea, there existed another home, a quieter one, now empty. It, too, had once held the hopes of a younger Jerry Orbach. And unlike the brownstone, it had not been preserved. Long before Jerry Orbach found his rhythm in New York, before the stages, the scripts, and the steady hum of city life, there was another home. It stood in Florida, modest and unassuming, a place tied more to beginnings than to legacies. It was here, during a quieter chapter of his life, that Orbach spent time before the rising tide of fame swept him toward the lights of Broadway and the television studios of Manhattan. But while the Chelsea brownstone flourished, curated and loved, the Florida house met a different fate. Today, that house sits in silence. Its brick exterior, once clean and crisp, is now worn and cracked. The front door is softened by rot, weathered by storms that came and went with no one inside to brace for them. Grass has grown high and wild around the perimeter, swallowing the walkways and climbing the walls. The windows, long boarded shut, block out sunlight that once warmed the rooms. Now they cast shadows. Inside, the decay is even more striking. The hardwood floors, once polished and strong, are fractured, scratched, warped, and layered in dust. Tiles lie broken in the bathroom. Fixtures sag. Paint peels like pages from a forgotten book. The living room, where voices may once have laughed and echoed, now offers only stillness. It is not a ruin of grandeur, but a quiet absence, one that speaks not of tragedy, but of time simply passing by. After Orbach's untimely passing in 2004, the home was inherited by family. But whether through emotional weight, practical challenges, or shifting priorities, no effort was made to restore or inhabit it. Perhaps it was too far from the life Jerry built. Perhaps the brownstone in Chelsea, filled with photographs, memories, and the echo of his voice, felt more like a memorial than this aging structure ever could. There is something haunting about a place left behind, not by force, but by choice or neglect. The Florida house, though once tethered to a rising actor with big dreams, now stands as a relic of unrealized potential. Not of Orbach's, but of the home's. It was not where he made his name, nor where he raised his sons. It holds no awards, no framed playbills, no neighborhood tributes. Only silence. And yet, even in its faded state, there's something poetic about it. The contrast between that forgotten house and the vibrant brownstone in New York mirrors the very arc of Orbach's life. A man who moved forward, who poured himself into his craft, and who built his legacy with purpose and love. The Florida home remains untouched, like a sealed envelope never read. Not because it didn't matter, but because some stories are simply meant to fade. And as the shadows lengthen over its overgrown lawn, that house now serves as a quiet counterpoint to everything Jerry Orbach gave the world, reminding us that even the most brilliant lives leave corners of themselves behind, resting not in grandeur, but in stillness. Jerry Orbach never chased celebrity in the way so many of his peers did. He did not require scandal or spectacle to remain relevant. Instead, he built his legacy the way one constructs a timeless song, note by note, word by word, quietly and with great care. From the neon marquees of Broadway to the steady pulse of network television, he carved out a place that felt earned, not given. He was, at his heart, a working actor. One who found beauty in the repetition of performance, who showed up with his lines memorized, his humor intact, and his heart open. His voice, warm, commanding, slightly weathered, became a part of American life, threading itself through the theater district, into film houses, and finally into homes across the country. As Detective Lenny Briscoe, he brought the weight of experience and the flicker of wit to every case. As Lumiere, he invited millions to the table with nothing more than charm and a song. But Orbach's legacy extends far beyond his roles. It lives in the memories of those who watched him transform words into something meaningful. It lives in the brownstone where children grew, where meals were shared, where joy was not posed, but lived. It lives in the community that claimed him not as a star, but as one of their own. It lives in the quiet fulfillment of a final wish, 2 lives given sight through the clarity of his generosity. Even the abandoned house in Florida, faded and still, plays a part in the larger story. Not every piece of a life can be preserved. Not every wall will remain standing. But in the contrast between the vibrant and the forgotten, we see something true. That legacy is not in buildings, nor even in accolades. It is in impact. It is in how one is remembered, not in marble, but in feeling. Jerry Orbach's story was not one of overnight fame, nor of Hollywood excess. It was a life built with care, filled with rhythm, generosity, and craft. A life that gave more than it took. And in that, it becomes something rare, something worthy of reflection. So, as the curtain closes on this chapter, we don't remember him only for the detective's badge or the Broadway bravado. We remember him for his steadiness, for his voice, for his humanity. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's golden era.